Welcome back to Gruber Motor Company. We have a very special guest today. I'd like to welcome Jamison Cummings to our podcast. Jamison was actually the first Tesla technician, and there's a lot of history there and a lot of stories.
There's a lot of stories. Thank you for having me.
Sure. So when did you start with Tesla?
March of 2007.
2007, okay. How many employees roughly at that time?
I sort of kind of came in a couple years into it, and I asked the HR person because I kind of wanted to know the spot and sort of history at the time. And I was told I was employee 195.
Okay.
But at the San Carlos location, we also had employees in Auburn Hills, Michigan, and also in England as well. So I would reckon there was probably about a little over 100 people in San Carlos.
Okay.
Yeah.
Still fairly small, though.
Yeah, very small. It had one lift. There was one garage door. There was a small machine shop. And one of the funny things about when I showed up, being the first, basically like dealer trained, formally trained technician, mechanic, was that I had a huge toolbox.
Uh-huh.
And so it was about 7 feet tall and about 8 feet long. And it was bright red. And even at the time, it was $13,000. It was a big toolbox. It was a Matco toolbox. So I wheeled this thing in, and the mechanical engineers there were like, it was like seeing, the monolith in 2001. Like
Right.
The thing was giant, right? And so the kind of as a joke was the toolbox was one of the new employees, and it was interesting because a lot of the mechies, they kind of didn't know the etiquette of. None of them knew what service was like, and so. Guys would come over and like open my toolbox to get tools, and I'd look at them and go, "What are you doing?" And they're like, "Oh, I need a tool," and I'm like, "Not from my toolbox."
Right, exactly.
It was very funny.
Yeah.
And they had a machine shop, and there was a toolbox there, and there was no tools in it. And I just remember we had like some of the greatest mechanical engineers that were like masters, MEs, all from mostly Stanford. And I remember them coming up to me going, "Hey, I set up this shop. What do you think?" Like can you give me a review on did I do a good job? They were so respectful and in awe of me, and it was really, really cool.
Very cool. Jeff Rosier just posted within the last few days that back then, if they got 5 cars out per week, that was pretty exciting. What kind of production volume did you see when you first started?
Oh, well, I mean, at first it was, let's get one done.
One, yeah.
Yeah. And so if you've probably seen Revenge of the Electric Car, they filmed putting Elon's car together. And that was a major production. We're talking lots of meetings. Elon's heavily involved. And I'm in that. There's little glimpses of me in that movie. My boss got a lot more kind of FaceTime on there. But they filmed that, and that was in the movie. And so when we were putting the battery in, just getting that one car done was
Really?
an accomplishment. And everybody was around, and the media was there. No pressure. And there's
Right.
5 people working on it, which actually, if you know, when you work on things, the more the worse. Because you got too many cooks in the kitchen.
So 2007.
Yeah, March of 2007. The funny thing was my wife was 9 months pregnant, and so when I got the job, I'm like, I'm about to have a baby, and they're like, no problem. And so I think I started 2 days before my daughter was born, and so March 7th, I started, and I literally was out, within a couple days.
Right.
And I came in for like a company meeting or something like that. But other than that, I started and was immediately on paternity leave.
So what kind of a job application process was it? Did they post an ad in the paper? I mean, how did you even find out that
I
it was
was
a job
just through a friend, actually. It was pretty interesting. And I actually really wasn't very serious about taking the job. In fact, if my friend ever hears this, it's kind of funny. They wanted to schedule me on I worked at odd shifts at the dealer I was working at, and I really liked riding motorcycles on my days off. And I would go to these track days and ride. And I decided to postpone my job interview because I wanted to go to a track day. So I was like, I can't do it on Wednesday, I'll do it next week.
Right.
So I was super kind of cavalier about it, not really into it.
Right. But they hired you anyway.
Yeah, and it was pretty interesting because they went through the formal process, and I wore a suit and everything, and I drove all the way there, and they did something they were well known for doing, not intentionally, just because it was kind of a hot mess. I was sitting in the waiting room for like 45 minutes.
Really?
And I was like, I literally went, you know what? Screw this. I drove all the way here. I'm gonna leave. And then I totally remember telling myself, and I don't talk to myself. I said, you know what? Just chill out. I told myself, cooler heads will prevail. I was losing my patience. And then the recruiter came over, this woman, Sandra. She was wonderful, really nice lady. And she goes, oh my God, I'm so sorry. You're still in here? Like, they just completely dropped the ball. It was just a hot mess.
Yeah.
So they got me in the interview room, and they went through the process. And the one guy actually asked me, so why do you want to work at Tesla? And I'm like, well, because Greg called me. I'm just here. I was very, very casual.
Right.
And it wasn't really easy for them to find somebody. But, they picked the right guy, I believe. And
Yeah.
My friend knew me from previous, and he knew that I was a professional. And I was a BMW mechanic, actually, before that, which is a good foundation for automotive.
So you transitioned really then from the internal combustion engine world into this EV world. What were the initial challenges that you perceived when you began to work on a Tesla Roadster?
Well, Tesla being such a small company, I think the initial challenges were tooling and lack of documentation. It was like everybody that designed something knew how to fix it, but they brought over their little desk-made, cabling system and their little UIs that they had on in their computer and stuff like that. And so I was watching, going, well, how am I going to translate that into like working on these things in the field? And so one of the big problems it wasn't so much about the internal combustion engine. In fact, I think that's actually a little bit overplayed. The reality is it's still just a car, and it just has more electronics, and there's a couple of dynamics. And the biggest thing was really being concerned about dealing with higher voltage, higher power, right? High current, and
It wasn't 12 volts anymore, in other words.
yeah, I mean 12 volts was there, right? But 12 volts never hurts you, really.
Right.
And so the real issue was, how do you handle this, and what are the protocols? And so I think that was probably the biggest learning curve. And then eventually, like, servicing inside the battery, but really getting the battery in and out was the first challenge.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It still is, by the way.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, so the day I showed up was the day we got VP1, which was our first production production prototype, which meant that the suppliers had all built the parts to spec. So that they were like, this is what we would be producing in production. And that was the first assembled car with production prototype parts, not hand-built prototype parts.
Okay.
And it came without a battery, obviously, for shipping reasons, and the batteries were all in San Carlos. And it was like literally like a big steel I-beam and some blocks of wood and some jacks. And once again, I was like, this isn't sustainable. I'm not buying I-beams and leaving them at Tesla service centers. We have to figure out a way. So that was, one of the big challenges in the beginning.
No kidding. So the validation prototypes, roughly how many of those were there? I think we're up to 27 from what we've seen in the field.
That sounds about right. It's been a long time. I mean, 2007 since to now, a lot has elapsed.
Yeah.
And I wasn't really keeping track. You got to remember, VPs were built also, and they were all over a lot of them were durability cars.
Right.
Test mules for other things. So it wasn't like they were all coming into San Carlos.
Right.
I just distinctly remember this green VP1 was a green car, and then as cars were coming through, we were putting batteries in them, but the numbers started to increase. That it's kind of a blur,
Yeah.
It's that first car meant. And we did a lot of conversion work on some of the EP cars, which were the original prototype vehicles.
The engineering prototypes.
Engineering prototypes, yeah.
Some of those ended up out in the owner base. And we talked to Martin,
EPs?
for example. Yeah.
Yeah, I never really agreed with that. I didn't think it was good to be putting prototypes out there, but Tesla needed to survive to make money, and so they were selling cars.
Yeah.
They turned all the VPs into production cars too, and those were fine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So those are a little bit more advanced than the engineering prototypes or the EPs.
Yeah, I mean, think about anything that's an engineering prototype. It's been bolted and unbolted a bunch of times. Multiple holes are drilled. We're retrofitting seats. I mean, I think we took one of the EP cars and made it a marketing car, and we had to put, wider, more comfortable seats in it because they were going to go on a marketing national tour, and you didn't want people sitting in a Lotus seat. You wanted to sit in the Tesla seat, which is wider. Things like that.
From one of the team members' perspectives, I know that there were periods of time in Tesla's history where bankruptcy was looming.
Yeah.
How did that affect you guys, basically?
Well, I think ignorance is bliss for most people. I don't think a lot of people really knew.
Mm-hmm.
So there would be murmurs. I actually, by that time, I was working in a different office, and it was called Circle Star, which was down the ways. It was in San Carlos, the office was right at the border of Redwood City. And so there was an office that we habitated where I was really getting less behind the toolbox and more into the desk. And I had a colleague that was one of the attorneys there. And I would have her review my documentation and spell check, because attorneys are like English professors.
Right. Yeah.
And I learned I actually told her once that I learned a lot of writing skill just from watching her. So I got a lot out of working with her. And she was the kind of person that would give me a little kind of bits and pieces and hear these stories about, we're kind of almost out of money,
Really?
So
Yeah.
it didn't loom large over a lot of people because they were just kind of heads down. But I always had my fingers in a bunch of different pots, so I kind of knew what was going on and heard that rumor. And it turned out to be around somewhere in, I think, the spring of 2009. They were like, Elon's sleeping on a couch, and I think he just threw $30 million at the company and wasn't really supposed to because of investor rounds and stuff, how that works. You're not just allowed to throw money at the company. And it did save the company's last couple weeks until we had an investment from Daimler. So it was kind of a cool story.
Yeah.
And when I watched Revenge of the Electric Car, they kind of revalidated that story, saying that we were basically out of money. I was like, I remember that.
Yeah,
I remember my friend telling me about that.
So on a day-to-day basis, a lot of people know some of the Tesla founders. How closely would you work with JB, Elon, Martin, and
Mark
perhaps-
Tarpening?
Yeah.
Well, close enough. It was a small company. Martin, I sort of kind of came in the transition period where Martin was still the CEO, but he wasn't for much longer. And so that was the kind of a famous battle, the kind of classic kicking the founders out, the money guy comes in. Elon's not the founder. He's been called the founder, but he was sort of the money guy that came on. Elon gets full credit for the success of the company. I don't think the founders would have
Hung in there the way that he did. Yeah.
No, I don't think they understood what was necessary to make the bold steps. And so, Elon is without Elon, there's no Tesla. But Mark Tarpening and Martin Eberhard were in and around the office, and I would see them. It was a small office, and then Elon would come in, and it was kind of like one of those things where they would turn the office temperature down, and Elon's here. Let's set the air conditioning and get everything ready for him to show up. So I heard the name a lot before he ever showed up, and then when he showed up, you knew he was there. And that was the San Carlos office, and as things changed, at one point in Circle Star, he was literally sitting right, in the same area. He was very involved.
Was he? Okay.
For a guy that's running multiple companies, I give that man credit for putting in more time, being there to work than anybody I've ever seen.
Anything he may have done that inspired you?
He inspired me to have hope in the company. I found it to be pretty interesting that when we were in 2007, we saw the Chevy Volt come out, and I literally dropped my tools and went, "We're done. They're going to smoke us."
Yeah,
right?
This is GM.
I completely was like, "This is hopeless. I'm wasting my time." And I can't recall whether it was within the day or later. This is the VP of Sales and Marketing, who was actually I worked under, a guy named Daryl Siri. And Elon came out and they did a meeting and they spoke about this. And they were able to, maybe they're just good at marketing, or maybe I'm easily marketable, but they were able to spin it in a way that was inspiring. And the one thing that Elon said that I'll never forget, and I always look at it in business in any way, is that collaboration is much more powerful than competition. And so the more the merrier.
Well
If you
said.
work with the people that are there, you actually make each other stronger. And I think that is it's a very, very binary way of thinking, to think that they're going to build something and it's going to hurt me, especially when you're talking about a burgeoning industry like electric cars. So that I felt was like one of the most memorable and powerful takeaways with Elon, because he came up and he said, "No, this is a good thing." And I was like, "Why?" And he's like, "This is going to get people to embrace Tesla, or to embrace electric cars." Because at the time, everybody any paradigm shift, there's always a bunch of haters.
Yeah.
They're just not very they're just not real critical thinkers.
Exactly,
Sorry,
yes.
that's the truth. With all topics, mind you. And so you got all these people that are saying, "Oh, this thing is stupid," there's all these bad ideas. So if you got another company that's jumping on board, they may buy a Volt first and buy a Tesla later. And how I didn't understand that at the time, I just, I needed to learn that. And Elon was the kind of person that had that type of insight.
That culture actually permeates the organization. I was talking to one of the local service managers last year, and we talked about one of the key people that had left and gone to one of the competing firms, Rivian or Lucid.
Yeah.
Her comment was, it's okay. The overall goal is to transition to sustainable energy, and how we achieve that, is irrelevant.
Right.
And that to me was notable, because I think that is the culture at Tesla.
I don't know what the culture is currently at Tesla. We were definitely motivated towards more environmental and green type endeavors. Mm-hmm. I think, the reality is that we have an established network of being relying on oil to do things, but it's taken hundreds of years. And so we're all born into it, and it's like there's gas stations at every corner, and it's just easy to buy a car. So when there's a drastic shift, that's something that the reality is that an electric car in most conditions makes more sense. And if you think about it, like if you were to have electric cars, I was actually mentioning this the other day, if you drove around in an electric car and somebody said, "Hey, I got this great idea, you could put this like really explosive, a can of this really explosive fuel in your back seat and run this really loud engine." I mean, could you imagine the resistance? Because it would be asinine.
Yeah.
So it's just it's a paradigm shift, and I think that the perpetuation of all the parties being involved in making a shift that makes the most sense, that makes more sense. There's obviously there's always going to be a negative towards whatever the change is, but electric cars. I mean, I drive a diesel, but they don't have something for me right now. But eventually, if we keep working towards building more EVs and stuff like that, the Rivians, the electric semi-trucks and stuff like that, those changes happen. It just doesn't happen overnight, and it doesn't happen with perfection.
Having been with the service organization in the early stages, a couple of questions. We work on Roadsters, and they are a nightmare to work on. They're,
tell me about it.
Full of design problems,
quality
they're not
issues.
Serviceable. I mean, just to get it fuses inside a 1,000-pound battery pack, you have to drop that thing out of the car.
Yeah.
Was it really because they ran out of time that they didn't make it more serviceable, or?
Wow. This is sort of like when I showed up at Tesla, I think probably my primary endeavor was serviceability. Mm-hmm. But you got to realize that I showed up at VP1, so I wasn't even there to be able to say, like, you can't get the fuses. How do you get the fuses out, right?
Yeah.
I tried. There's a sense of diplomacy in like sort of office politics where you can't just go in and kick people's door down and go, "Your design sucks, nobody can fix it." Because the reality is you don't have the benefit of metrics. Like Honda has millions of cars, and they can go, "See, when we designed this, it cost us money. Let's just make an adjustment," right? Mm-hmm. Well, Tesla's flying blind into the wind, and really the end game is to get as many cars on the road as possible. Service is not even a secondary concern; it's like a tertiary concern. Mm-hmm. The service guy, they were never building anything to make our lives easier, your lives easier, right? They were building the product to get it done. So time becomes sort of inevitably what it was, because if they had sat there and toiled, first of all, Elon would have just scuttled you for that, right?
We don't have any money to do that.
Yeah, we don't have money and time, and like, do you want this car built or not, right? So there's always a balance. So I was that kind of voice in the room constantly, especially in Model S design. Mm-hmm. We were in lots of meetings trying to say, look, if you got to take the battery out to get this one small part out, that makes no sense. That doesn't mean that we had enough influence or power to do that. One of my big deals on the Model S was the bumper. The plastic bumper did not wrap up around the taillights. There was a piece of metal around the back of the taillights. Mm-hmm. So if you take a rear hit, you now have to do more metal work and alignment. In the later cars, if you look at most cars, the bumper line goes all the way up to the taillights and then comes across at an angle. Right. We campaign constantly showed every example of every single car, and the body guys would have loved it because the fitment is better. Mm-hmm. And to try and get that so that collision repair shops wouldn't be having to replace other parts, we just couldn't get it done. They wouldn't do it, So we were constantly trying to campaign, but the Roadster was too late. The one thing we managed to get was a hole in the chassis so you could put a pin in there to lift the car.
For the rear lifts.
That was I take partial credit for that design change. That was
that's a safety factor.
That was a safety. Well, I mean, it was convincing enough to get them to put a simple hole, and we're also working with Lotus and Lotus body structures to get them to make the change, because the the Lotus wasn't falling off the rack, but the Tesla was.
Yeah.
And so there's just if you start to throw safety and monetary damage, we were able to get that.
Were there compromises made in the brakes, for example? I mean, the Roadster brakes are just not quite what they could be.
Well, I think they were the compromises that they were trying to use existing vendors. The original Roadster has a lot of existing vendors that Lotus was already using.
Mm-hmm.
So everything was sort of like, you've probably heard about the famous transmission problems. I mean, the first transmission was like, hey, I got a guy, like I know a guy at this company, XYZ, and I can't remember the exact names of the companies, but the gearbox company was really just a company that cut gears. They didn't make gearboxes.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, we'll make a gearbox for you. And then it just didn't work. And that's when they had to go off and make other gearboxes.
Gotcha.
So, a lot of those suppliers, like the brakes, they were using existing suppliers that Lotus was familiar with. It's just easier sourcing, and once again, probably a time quotient involved in that too.
And then the specialized product that went into the Roadster, like the battery pack, for example. Is it true that thing was made by a barbecue manufacturer in Thailand?
Well, no. That's not true. The actual, if I recall, there was a factory that we were going to build batteries in Thailand, and that was a barbecue manufacturer, and I think it was a subsidiary of Coleman or something.
Okay.
If I recall, you can't quote me exactly. These are like kind of like. I was friends with the engineer that went to Thailand to set up the factory, and then they never ended up using it.
Right.
That's a very interesting story, because when they originally came up with the concept of how they were going to produce it and pitched it to all of the investors, was that they were going to have Lotus build the car, we were going to build the batteries in Thailand, and then we were going to take the batteries and ship them all the way to England, and then from England we were going to ship the car back to the US. And what I find fascinating in retrospect was that you had all of these really incredibly bright, wealthy investors going, yeah, that sounds like a good idea.
Great idea.
Yeah. And somewhere around, I would say 2008 or 2009, this guy named Ryan Popple, who just recently passed away, he came into my office with my boss and I, and he goes, look, I got this idea and I just want to run it by you, because if I don't want to miss something and then get eviscerated by Elon. And he goes and he whiteboards this out, and he goes, this is insane, because you're going to have so much money on boats. And the whole idea of manufacturing, as you probably know, is when you write the check, you want to be able to cash the check as fast as possible.
Right.
And if your supply chain is really long, you can go bankrupt with all your inventory sitting and shipping and receiving. And we've seen these stories exist.
Yeah.
And so what I found so fascinating was they raised $150 million, and nobody caught this. Nobody caught this, except for this guy, Ryan Popple. And I find I kind of feel honored that I was able to help him say, my boss and I, he came into our office, closed the door to do this thing, and I went, oh my God, that is so fundamentally simple and sound. Even a dummy like me understands this, and they were just going to journey on building I think about it, batteries in Thailand, shipping them to England, and shipping. It's asimine.
Yeah, the
and
logistics.
Nobody understood that. And so what he did, which took a lot of political undertaking, was to tell Lotus, sorry, just build the chassis. Make some umbilical cord to do a test, and then we're going to bring the car to Menlo Park, and we're going to put batteries in there.
Sure.
And that saved the company. Probably one of the many things that saved the company. But.
So somewhere along the way, they figured out that, two things. They were selling them under cost, which is obvious because of all of the things that you just described, and many more. But only 5 to 7% of the Tesla Roadster today is original Lotus Elise.
Yes.
What were the reasons for all the body modifications and changes and stretching and widening and all of that?
Well, the story, as I understand it, is that Elon is tall, I think 6'1" or 6'2", and he got in the car and said, "This isn't going to work."
Okay, yeah.
And so the original modeling was to cram everything into a small, more Elise-based platform, and then just get it out there. Because they were sort of copying the T0, which is where they stole the drive control from.
I didn't show you our T0 when you
You
were
have a
over there.
T0 here?
We do, yeah.
Oh,
It's-
yeah, that'll be cool. Let's get a picture of that. I've never seen one in real life.
Yeah, well, it's a shell. It went through our first fire.
Oh, okay.
We sandblasted it, and we're going to paint it yellow,
cool.
and we're going to make a tribute wall.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
That's cool. So, Martin really just wanted to get the thing built. Elon looked at it more as, well, we got to build something that people are going to want to have. And so he, being, Martin was not short either, but Elon didn't, he wanted the car to be something he could get into. And, if you've ever tried to get into a Lotus Elise, I mean, it's painful.
Yeah.
We had the original mule. I was actually taken on a test drive during my job interview in the first Lotus mule, and it was an Elise. And at the time, I had my back was sore, and I remember it was just so painful. I was trying not to wince getting in the car because it was so. And I'm big, even a Lotus, a Tesla is hard.
How
to get
tall
in.
are you, by the way?
6'3".
6'3", okay,
Yeah.
for the viewers.
Yeah, 6'3", 230. So I'm not small. It's not a car built for me. But the Lotus was even worse. So that was where they made those changes to lower the sill height and to make the seats wider and do all those things. And that was more of an Elon perpetuated thing. The problem is that the homologation for crashing was everything starts costing more money.
Yeah.
And I believe, once again, based on my knowledge of how history went down, is that was one of the bones of contention with Martin and Elon, was Elon saying, "I want to change it. I'm the guy with the money." Martin's going, "I want to get this thing built." But the metrics and the money didn't make sense the way it was being run. So, with all due respect to Martin being the creator, the company never would have succeeded had Elon not come in and probably brought in people like Ryan Popple and made these changes that you just never would have been able to predict in the early days of the company. You have to be able to be fluid and pivot on something, building a car.
Yeah. At what point in time did Tesla transition from using someone else's car body for the Roadster, the Lotus body, to actually building their own, car bodies, Model S? I mean, was that tooling? It seems like much more facility and space were required.
Well, I mean, at what time was when they were developing the prototype, and they actually built the body in Detroit.
In Detroit.
Yeah, I actually picked up the first body. There was a company right near General Motors in northern Detroit area. It's actually kind of a cool road where there was like a GM place, a Ford place. It's like, welcome to Detroit, right?
Yeah.
The big three.
Motor City.
Yeah, it was a road called Van Dyke Road. So any listeners from Detroit probably know where this road is. And there was a big building right next to the GM. It was a GM training center, and they were called a facilitator. And what they do as a contractor, as something you're familiar with, is they went and they took the products and they would help set up factory floors and stuff. And so they were taking everything and they were mocking up and setting up how production would be. And I believe that's where the bodies were also built. And I remember going there and checking it out and being asked to pick up this Model S body and carry it over, because, like, with 6 of us, it was probably 1,200 pounds. It was just the frame, if I remember right.
Shell, yeah.
Yeah.
Was Franz von Holzhausen heavily involved at that point in time as well?
Oh gosh, well, I mean, he, as a company like Tesla, he's more heavily involved as a designer than any other company. He had sort of last word on production stuff, and that made it for a very stylish car, but it also, has its drawbacks, because you want the engineer to validate functionality, and form doesn't beat function when it comes to the customer getting the car. So there was a couple things that I was aware of, like the air conditioning vents having speaker grills on them, and then when they finally went to Canada, where it's super cold and defrost has to be like maximally efficient, it wasn't working because the speaker grill was diffusing the deep. These are like there's like a jillion stories I probably forgot.
Yeah.
But this was like a one that sticks out. But the thing that I remember the most was the engineer was a good friend of mine. He was a really great guy, one of my favorite engineers, and he did the aerodynamics and the HVAC. He did the upgrade for the 2.0. It went from the Eberspacher high voltage controller to
the Roadster.
On the Roadster.
Yeah.
He's responsible for making the battery cool better. So he came in sort of around the time I came in. And I remember talking to him going, what's the deal? And it was like Franz kind of had the last say on the way the dash was. But the reality is that, if you look at a dash, it has like these snorkely looking, you can't see it because you got to look up, right? But it has like a snorkel type shaped thing that pounds air into the windshield, because when you need it, you really need it. It's a safety factor. Yeah. And I'll never forget him sort of apologizing, even though it wasn't his fault, in email. And I was going, man, that takes some real humility, right? Like, you gotta, like, your survival of your job is you have to basically take responsibility for something that wasn't your fault. So that was kind of the sort of like the nuances of him, of Franz, who's an amazing designer, not taking anything away from him. He's just not an engineer, right? And so that's where some of those synergies sometimes didn't blend well. But I think in general the designs of the car are stunning. I mean, the first time I ever drove a Model S, I was blown away.
Yeah. I
mean, it had cardboard door panels, and it was a complete prototype, and I was completely sold. So, and it's a beautiful car. To this day, it's a beautiful car.
So we would all hope that these car manufacturers would take their prototypes through the temperature extremes. The Tesla Roadster really suffers here in Phoenix when it's 115.
Yeah.
It's a great test bed, but at the same time, it's very tough on the cars. So you mentioned something about Dubai at one point in time.
The what?
Dubai. Yeah.
Oh yeah, yeah. So that was against, like, what we ended up doing was something I always fought really hard not to do. Was making one-off parts. Mm-hmm. Because it's super hard to track and service. Like, if the car comes in broken, how do you know it has a special PEM?
Right.
But the people that we were servicing were future investors, so we needed to make them happy. So I kind of understood, like, wasn't going to speak up too much about this. And what had happened is that there was a couple of cars that were owned by a sheikh who runs the water and power. So he's like big, way up there, right?
Fin 75, I think.
You know better than me, probably.
I've heard a story.
Is it red?
I don't remember the color.
There was a few of them. We had a few there, right? And so we went there, and we were trying to understand what the problem was. Is that the guy would drive the car, and then the PEM would overheat, and he'd be going down the freeway, and then Dubai and Abu Dhabi I think it was actually in Abu Dhabi where we went for this. We had a service issue in Dubai, but we also went to Abu Dhabi. And they have roundabouts there. Yeah. And so you get off the roundabout, and you're like, oh, I'm in a Tesla Roadster, I could just squirt into traffic, right? And so I actually did the drive, and I drove, and I got off, and I'm like, okay, I'm going to jump out into traffic. Here comes the big, Tata bus, like coming right. I'm like, and I go to pull out, and the thing goes, brrr. And it's thermally limited. Yeah. And so we ended up changing some components inside. We brought special PEMs that would resist the thermal limiting, and we put them in these cars. So to make a short story long, this was kind of one of those kind of special one-off things, and that was the main reason. And the funny thing is because it was a high-profile person, like, they're like, well, let's just send our top guys. So they sent me, and they sent my colleague from Germany. And he was actually way more in the field doing stuff, and I was sort of more behind a desk supporting him. Right. But they sort of kind of sent, like, we're going to send our top guys out there to do it. So it was kind of funny. We were the top guys. Yeah. And it was actually kind of like a great vacation in a way, because it was just such a different place to go and explore and stuff like that. And we were driving these Tesla Roadsters all through Abu Dhabi and Dubai, and just the look on people's faces was just like, especially nose to tail, like, driving through. And one of the things that you might not know about there is that license plate numbers are a big deal. And so if you have a really low license plate number, it's automatic that you're like, that guy he's a big deal.
Okay, he's a VIP.
Yeah. He's a VIP. So I was driving around in this car that had a license plate that said 75 on it, and people literally would get out of my way.
Yeah,
It was hilarious. And apparently, like, you could buy a license plate there. So people would go up and be like, I'll give you $2 million for that license plate.
Oh my God.
It's crazy. It's crazy. So my colleague, his name was Rudy, he pointed it out. He's like, yeah, they're really crazy. They tried to offer money for that license plate. So I'm driving around in this car with a 7.5 on it. People are just like, must be VIP.
Very cool.
Yeah, it's wild.
So what advice would you have for Tesla, knowing where they've been, where they are now?
You know, I don't know if I'm actually in a position to give advice at this point. I mean, that company's kind of grown. Its level of success is amazing. Like, it's kind of coming back to me now. For a while I moved on and did a lot of other technology and stuff, and sort of kind of gotten back into the automotive trade, and now I'm sort of finding my legacy is more poignant and relevant now as a result of it. You've been in it. Like, I remember seeing things about you, on LinkedIn and stuff like that, and I think you reached out to me on LinkedIn years ago. Mm-hmm. So I knew of you as a guy that was kind of doing this and kind of keeping the dream alive, especially the original cars. And for me, it was, I had already moved on, and so I've always like kind of looked at Tesla as like my progeny. Like, I'm very proud of the kid that it's grown up to be.
Yeah.
And at this point, it's grown up to a point where I don't know that I would be able to give them advice. I think that they, what would it matter? They've been so successful in so many ways, and a lot of it has to do with their anti-gravity stock. I've always said that Tesla stock defies gravity. Mm-hmm. But good for them. I mean, you use the tools you got. So, but yeah, I don't know what I would say. I would, it would be cool to maybe to meet Elon, and there was a specific time I spent with Elon, never really one-on-one, but there was one time, and we both went to Jay Leno's garage, and I was with him on that, and cool. So it would be great to meet Jay Leno again too, and go, hey, I was there when Elon did the test drive.
Right.
And so that was a cool thing, and it was funny because Elon was late, and it was slightly raining in Burbank, and then Elon was wearing a suit and tie, and Jay is sponsored by Eagle One car care products, so he has this whole shelf of Eagle One. So we're there spraying and wiping down. Elon Musk and I are wiping down his car. Yeah. He's got his tie flapping around, and we're cleaning his car up for Jay's show. It's pretty funny.
Very cool.
But that goes to show you, he didn't go like, "Hey, Jamison, clean the car." I mean, he was there doing the work.
He was pitching it.
Always, yeah.
Very cool. Well, let me see if we've missed anything.
Here, I want to just do something real quick.
Yeah.
I want to, if you don't mind, get my own little action shots in here, yeah. If I can get the angle.
So your name is on the carbon fiber plaque that exists on all of these Signature Roadsters.
Yeah. I actually forgot about that. But I was recently looking at, I can't remember, I saw something on the web and I saw that plaque, and I was like, oh, I forgot about the plaque.
I think you posted it. It was a car that's here right now, bin 71, which was owned by a Red Hot Chili Pepper drummer or something.
Yes, the love one.
Yeah, and it's got a bit of profanity in it, so we're cautious about where to post that, if at all, right?
Yeah.
But I a couple of years ago, I blew up that plaque and I posted it on Facebook, and I was amazed at how many people came out of the woodwork and said, "That's me, that's me, that's me."
I found a high-res photo of one of the plaques, and so I decided to blow it up because I'm like, see if I can find my signature. Yeah. And I found my signature and I circled it, and I think I posted something on my Instagram about it, and I was like, that's my name right there.
You're part of history.
It was, it's a bit of a novelty, but it's actually, that's kind of the things where I'm sort of embracing that legacy now, that it wasn't a flash in the pan job. Because at the time we were just like, this thing could fold at any time,
And the other part of it is we work with Lotus at times, because we're always challenged in trying to find parts for the Roadster.
Yeah.
And they're actually very generous with help.
That's good.
But what I found out is that they are very passionate about the Roadster, even this late in the game. They feel that they are part of the EV revolution because they really built the first Roadsters there. Bin number 5, the one that we have, that was built in Hethel and then shipped here.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's a strong attachment to anything Roadster.
So they're
within
proud of the
Lotus.
legacy too, then.
Very much so, yeah.
That's good because it seemed to have a subtle nuance of adversarial competition when we worked with them back in the day. But I think we all grow up or whatever.
Well,
and
that's
you start
human
to-
nature.
Yeah,
Like
absolutely.
you're saying.
And they definitely, they should be proud. They should be kind of nurturing to the character of that car because they are instrumental in making it happen.
Yeah, and some of the new EVs that they're coming out with now, I mean, they're over the top.
Yeah.
I mean, there are car designers that are pretty much middle of the road standard, type designs, and then you have your over the top designs, like Lamborghini has always done compared to Ferrari, for example.
Right, right.
And I think Lotus is definitely headed in that same direction.
Yeah,
Let me
absolutely.
turn that off. Sorry about that.
That's okay.
All right. Let's see if I've got anything else here.
Yeah.
We talked about, did you have any doubts that they would make it? And of course, everyone did.
I had some extreme doubts. Smile, Pete.
There we go.
There we go. To be honest with you, even before, I distinctly remember having a conversation with a powertrain engineer, a really good dude that we, generally have those sort of break room chats.
Right.
And this was probably 6 months before the Model S came out. And I remember him using the term pipe dream.
Mm-hmm.
So we all had our doubts, and I think that's where kind of Elon deserves a lot of credit is, whether it's painful or not, he brute forced that car into reality. And there's been a lot of people that would have been like, well, we can't get it done on Friday, we'll start back on Monday. And Elon's the kind of guy that says, no, you're going to come back tomorrow and we're going to finish this, what I mean? And that doesn't work well for work-life balance, but in the goal of an objective, that he's, that's one of his kind of core competencies, in my opinion, from my experience at least.
Yeah, very tenacious.
Yeah, absolutely.
Never surrender.
Yeah. What else? Anything else interesting?
I think that was it.
I think that's it. We've been going for almost an hour.
Oh, wow.
Well,
See what happens?
We'll edit, we'll trim a bit, yeah.
Yeah.
No, it's good. It's good. Yeah, I think that did you hit all your points on that paper though?
I did, yes, I just went through them.
Okay.
And I want to thank you. Should we do an outro?
Yeah, let's do a close.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for joining us, and thank you, Jamison Cummings,
you.
for joining us on our podcast. And make sure you subscribe. Watch us on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, and we'll catch you next time. Thank you very much.
Yeah, it was a pleasure.
There we go. Hey, by the way, I was in a Hapkido for years.
Hop keto?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.